Hello and welcome. In this video I would like to explain how the oral A-level examination in English works, and more importantly how you can prepare effectively and structure your presentation successfully. Many students lose marks not because they lack knowledge, but because they are unsure about the structure of the exam or how to approach the different tasks, and this video is designed to help you avoid exactly that problem. I will explain the format of the examination, what is expected from you during the preparation time, and how you can organize your presentation in a clear and professional way. The goal is not to provide ready-made answers. Instead, I want to give you a methodology that you can apply to any material you receive on the day of the exam. Before we begin, it is important to understand what this video is and what it is not. The purpose of this video is to give you an overview of the oral examination and to provide methodological support. In other words, I want to show you how to approach the tasks and how to structure your answers. I will also explain some of the assessment criteria, knowing that examiners are looking for can help you focus your preparation on the aspects that actually matter. However, this video cannot replace your own revision. You are still responsible for revising the topics we have covered in class and for practicing the skills required in the examination. So if you need additional materials, examples or documents, you can find them in the Padlet linked on this slide. Throughout the video, I will focus primarily on practical advice that you can immediately use during the examination, but please do check the Padlet for all important and necessary materials. Now let's begin then with a general overview. The oral exam consists of two parts. The first part is a presentation, and depending on the examination, this presentation usually lasts between 10 and 15 minutes. 10 minutes is the bottom, 15 the upper boundary, and it has to land somewhere in between. So it does make sense to have a timer or ask the teacher how much time you have left. But this is the part we will focus on in this video now. Second part is a discussion with the examiner, and this discussion also lasts approximately 10 to 15 minutes. And one important point is that the topic of your presentation will generally not be discussed again in detail during the second part. So the discussion is usually used to address additional topics and competencies that you acquired in class or that you worked on in class. And according to the regulations, both parts together must cover content from at least 2 different semesters of the qualification phase. And if you're interested in the exact legal wording and requirements, you can find the relevant document in the Padlet. But for now, it is enough to remember that the oral exam consists of a prepared presentation followed by a discussion. Now let's take a closer look at the examination process. The first phase is the preparation time. You have 30 minutes, and during these 30 minutes you should first read the material carefully. In most cases this will be a relatively short text extract of a maximum of 300 words in English. Next, you should obviously analyze the tasks, and many mistakes happen because students do not fully understand what the task verbs actually require them to do. You should make notes during your preparation, and they should help you structure your presentation and organize your arguments logically. We're going into more depth in the course of this video. You are allowed to use dictionaries during the preparation phase, so make use of them if necessary, but do not spend too much time looking up individual words. Focus on understanding the overall meaning of the text. That's key. After the presentation time comes the examination itself, and first you deliver your presentation that you prepared, and afterwards you discuss further aspects with the teacher. And we are now taking a closer look at the first part in particular. So before we look at the individual tasks in more detail, let's briefly talk about the kinds of materials you might receive in the examination. In most cases, you will receive a written text of around 200 to 300 words. This length is enough to allow for a meaningful analysis, but short enough to prepare within the 30 minutes you have available, and this limit is explicitly stated by the curriculum. So it's an official limit. The material can be either fictional or non-fictional. You know that from your written exams as well. Fictional text might be an extract from a novel, a short story, drama, occasionally a film script. So all the text types basically you know from the written exams as well. A non-fictional text could be an extract from a speech, an opinion article, newspaper article, blog post, social media post, or another authentic text dealing with one of the topics you have studied in class. Especially in the advanced course, there's also a small chance that you receive a much shorter text, sometimes fewer than 200 words. In that case, the text itself usually contains more complexity and requires you to draw more strongly on your background knowledge from class. However, written texts are by far the most common examination material. You may also receive a cartoon. Sometimes the cartoon is the main source that you have to analyze. In that case, you should first describe what you can see before analyzing visual techniques, explaining the cartoon's message. In other cases, the cartoon is only used as an impulse for task 3, and then the focus is less on analyzing every visual detail and more on using its central message as a starting point for your discussion or evaluation. So there you simply have to focus on what the draftsman is trying to say, or the draftsperson rather. Same principle applies to statistics. The statistic is the main material. You should describe the data before interpreting it. If it's only an additional source, you mainly use it to support your argument in task 3, and there you have to pinpoint what does it actually say, and how does that fit to the comment task. Finally, although it's quite rare, you may also receive an audio or video instead of a written text. In that case, your preparation time is automatically extended by 10 minutes to give you enough time to listen or to watch the material. But like I stated already, this is really rare, and I have never done it before, and I've never encountered an exam like that, or I have been part of an exam like that. Important thing to remember is this: although the materials may differ, the methodology stays exactly the same. Whether you analyze a speech, a novel, extract, a cartoon, or statistic, you will still complete the same 3 tasks. First, understanding the material, then analyzing how it creates meaning, and finally, evaluating or discussing the issues it raises. And this consistent structure is what makes the exam manageable, regardless of the material you receive, and it's basically the same you know from the written examinations, and just on a smaller and shorter level. But before your presentation, your preparation actually begins, you get your tasks and you receive them in the examination room, not in the preparation room. Those are 2 different things. But in the examination room, your teacher is giving you your tasks. When you enter the preparation room, you will usually be asked whether you feel able to complete the exam. This is a formal step, and you have to answer with yes. If you answer no, you've got to see a doctor, and you'll get a different date. Once you receive the material, your first task is not to just go away and say, I looked at it, it's fine, but instead carefully read all information that has been provided. Pay particular attention to the instructions, the task verbs, any contextual information about the text. And if anything is unclear, this is the moment to ask questions. However, there is an important limitation. You may ask questions about the structure of the task or about organizational aspects, but not about vocabulary, content, or correct interpretation, of course, because that's what your teacher cannot give away. And after that, your preparation time begins. But now let's have a look at how these first steps in the examination room, when you receive your tasks, how they can look like in a real examination situation. And the following example, I will demonstrate how I would approach the material during this first phase of the preparation. All right, we're back in the presentation, and now that we've looked at the first steps of the preparation phase, let's talk about the most important principle of a successful oral examination. Most important thing is structure. Structure is everything. Many students believe that success mainly depends on how much content they know. Of course, content knowledge is important, but in an oral exam, organization is just as important. Think of your presentation as a guided tour. Your audience, that means the 3 teachers that are with you, should always know where they are, where you're going next, and why you are talking about a particular aspect. And a strong presentation follows a clear structure. You begin with an introduction. You introduce the material, explain what you're going to do. Then you move on to task 1, where you demonstrate your understanding of the text, so the comprehension task. After task 2, you should not jump directly into the next task, but instead use a short transition. This helps your audience follow your line of thought. Next comes task 2, the analysis. And again, when you have finished, use another transition before moving on. Then you address task 3, where you evaluate, discuss, comment on, or assess the issue. And finally, you finish with a short conclusion that rounds off your presentation and leaves the audience with a clear final impression. Notice that transitions are just as much a part of the structure as the actual tasks. They connect the individual sections and make your presentation sound coherent and professional. A common mistake is to treat the presentation as 3 completely separate answers. Instead, try to think of it as one connected presentation with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Your goal is not simply to answer the questions, your goal is to guide your audience through your presentation. And if the examiner can always follow your argument and knows exactly where you are in your presentation, you're already doing many things right. Note that at the end of the theoretical structure, I will provide a full spoken solution for the model exam. So you get all this wrapped up and put into action with the help of the model exam that is provided in the Padlet and that I have already referred to in the preparation room part. We now come to the first part of your actual presentation, the introduction and the theoretical aspects here. Don't underestimate the importance of this section. First impressions matter, and a clear and confident introduction immediately shows the examiner that you have understood the material and that you have a plan for your presentation. Your introduction has 2 main purposes. First, you introduce yourself and the material. So you briefly state who you are, and then you start with the material. The examiner already knows the text, obviously, but introducing the material demonstrates that you understand its context and that you can classify it appropriately. And depending on the information provided, you should mention the title, the author, the text type, the source, and the date of the publication. You should also briefly identify the topic and, if possible, the target audience. This is particularly important for speeches, newspaper articles, blog posts, and other non-fiction texts where the intended audience influences the author's choices. So, however, be careful not to spend too much time on this part. The introduction should be concise and efficient. Usually 1 or 2 well-structured sentences are enough. The second purpose of the introduction is signposting. Signposting means telling your audience what you are going to do in the following minutes. Think of it as providing a roadmap. The examiner should know from the beginning how your presentation is organized. For example, you might begin by saying, today I'm going to present an extract from Antonio Guterres's message for World Water Day 2024. Or you can continue with, and then you can continue with something like, first I'll outline the main ideas presented in the text, then I will analyze how the author conveys these ideas, and finally I will discuss the author's central claim. Notice how this immediately creates structure and gives your audience clear expectations. But what you say during your signposting massively depends on your tasks. So it's basically using what your tasks demand from you and put it into a structure. Think of the tasks themselves not as separate aspects like I said before, but as a framework for your presentation, and they fill this framework with actual content. And if you put that together, you have a strong introduction, and that not only introduces the text but also the presentation. And if you start in a clear and organized way, it becomes much easier to stay structured throughout the rest of the exam. So after the introduction, you move on to task 1. In most cases, task 1 is an aspect-focused summary. The task tells you which aspects of the text you should focus on, and your job is to present these clearly and logically. There are the typical task verbs here: outline, sum up, point out, describe, also sometimes summarize. But the main goal is always quite simple: show that you understand the text and that you can explain its content in your own words. Useful strategy is to organize your answer into categories, especially using those that the task has set for you. So here it really says focus on the aspects that are given to you by the task. An exception can be summarize the text, which is really rare and which doesn't happen very often, because usually you do have certain aspects that you have to focus on, and these are the ones that you address. Just as important as knowing what to do is knowing what not to do. And task 1 is not an analysis task. Yeah? So do not discuss or address language, stylistic devices, narrative techniques in a fictional text, and do not interpret any hidden meanings yet. And even going a step further, do not comment on the author's ideas or evaluate them. Those things belong to tasks 2 and 3. Simple rule here is: task 1 asks, what does the text say? The question is always what. Yeah, what is given to me here? What am I presented with? Focus on the content, organize it clearly, present it in your own words. If you manage to do that, you're absolutely on the right track and on a very good one. Now, before we move on to task 2, I'd like to point out something that many students underestimate: transitions. Transitions may seem like small detail, but they make a big difference. They help your audience follow your presentation, show that you are giving one coherent talk rather than 3 separate answers. And one thing you should avoid is simply saying something like this: task 2 is blah blah blah. Technically it's not wrong, but it sounds mechanical and reminds everyone that you are simply working through an exam sheet. Instead, try to connect the tasks naturally. So for example, after finishing task 1, you could say something like, having outlined the main ideas of the text, I'll now analyze how the author conveys these ideas, or you might say, this leads directly to my analysis of the communicative strategies and the use of language, or whatever the task demands of you. Notice that these transitions link the content of task 1 with the purpose of task 2. Your presentation becomes much smoother, and your teacher can clearly follow your line of thought. Throughout the exam, always think of yourself as giving a presentation, not simply answering 3 independent questions. That's a key thing and is quite important for the language assessment and the presentation assessment, which we'll have a look at in the course of this video. So before you begin analyzing individual techniques, you should always start with an overall interpretation. That's the key thing. It's the core of the whole analysis, basically of the whole exam. It's probably one of the most important pieces of advice I can give you. Many students immediately begin listing stylistic devices, narrative techniques, or communicative strategies. But instead, first ask yourself, what is the overall impression the text creates? So, in fact, you look closely at most task 2 instruction, you will notice that the wording usually consists of 2 parts. First, there's the actual analysis question. For example, analyze how the author presents a character. Only then comes the phrase focus on usually narrative techniques or use of language in this respect, or for a non-fiction text is quite often something like analyze how the author conveys his view on this and that, focus on communicative strategies and use of language. And always answer the first part before analyzing the focus aspects. So in fictional texts, think about the impression the reader gets of a character, a relationship, or a situation, whatever the task asks you to look at. In non-fiction texts, it's usually the same. Identify the author's main message and communicative intention. Yeah. So you might begin with sentences like, overall, the author presents, the extract creates the impression that, or the text mainly aims to this or that. And this overall interpretation becomes your guiding idea. And everything you analyze afterwards should support, explain, or develop that interpretation further. If a stylistic device does not really help explain your overall interpretation, it's probably not worth discussing or mentioning overall. Yeah. For example, quite often I come across students finding alliterations in 2 random words that follow each other. Yeah, and they present that as a stylistic device. It's not in many cases. Ask yourself a question: does this really support my overall interpretation? Does it support the author's main message and intention in one way or the other? And if you say no, it doesn't, at least not intentionally, then don't mention it in your presentation afterwards. I was already getting a bit ahead of myself, so let's now look at how you should actually analyze the focus aspects. So whenever you identify a communicative strategy, a narrative technique, or a language feature, ask yourself one simple question. Again, I'm repeating myself, but I can't stress this enough. How does this support my overall interpretation? And that question should guide your entire analysis again. Useful structure to elaborate on the individual techniques, strategies, or use of language. is that it consists of 3 parts: the device itself, the evidence, and the created effect. So you should first identify the technique, strategy, or language, device, whatever there is, and then you should be precise, use the correct technical terminology wherever possible. So for example, say the author uses anaphora instead of the author starts every sentence with the same words. Yeah, so the technical terminology matters here as well. Next step, provide evidence. So here you've got to refer to the text by either quoting short phrases or paraphrasing relevant passages. Whenever appropriate, mention line numbers, paragraphs, so the teachers around you know exactly what you are referring to. And finally, the most important aspect, the effect. So it's basically the reason why is this device used. Do not stop after naming a stylistic device. Yeah, instead explain what it achieves. For example, you can use phrases like this helps the author to this emphasizes this and that, this creates the impression that and remember, analysis is never just about identifying techniques. The techniques themselves are not that interesting. What really matters is why the author uses them and how they contribute to the meaning of the text and to the overall interpretation, to the general impression a reader gets of a piece of fiction, or the main idea and intention the author of a non-fictional piece tries to convey or achieve. And every point you make should connect back to your overall interpretation. And if that works, your analysis will be coherent, convincing, and exactly what the exam demands of you.
All right, after completing your analysis, it's time to move on to task 3. Just as before, try not to switch abruptly by saying something like, now I'll do task 3. Instead, use a transition that connects your analysis with your evaluation. For example, you could say, having analyzed how the author presents this issue, I will now discuss the central claim, or this analysis provides a basis for evaluating the author's position, obviously always depending on what the task actually asks of you. These transitions show, again, that your evaluation is not independent of the text. Instead, it builds directly on the analysis that you've just presented and shows that this is all one coherent presentation, that all these things are connected, which they are. The tasks are designed in a way that everything is connected, actually. So task 3 is not about giving a random personal opinion. It's about developing a judgment that is informed by the material that you have just analyzed. And a smooth transition, again, makes this connection clear from the very beginning and continues what you've done before. So again, transition plays a major structural part here. Good. So finally, for the actual task 3. It's the part where you move beyond the text itself and develop your own well-founded judgment. Notice that I say well-founded. We're not interested in whether we agree with your opinion. What we want to see is that you can argue logically and support your position with convincing reasons. Stress convincing. Yeah, unlike in the written A-level examination, there's no creative writing task here, so you're not asked to continue a story or write a speech or stuff like that. It's always argumentative. It's always evaluation comment here. Text or the exact structure depends on the task verb. If you're asked to comment on something, you should clearly state your opinion, supported with relevant arguments. Argumentation is usually linear. That means each argument should strengthen your own position. If you're asked to discuss an issue, you should explicitly consider both sides, present arguments for and against before reaching your own conclusion. Then there's the verb assess. If you are asked to assess something, your judgment's usually based on criteria. You often have to decide to what extent a statement is true, justified, effective, convincing, whatever. Tip here, make yourself a scale from on a scale from 0 to 10. Where would you rate this statement or this fact, this circumstance, without actually saying it? Okay, on a scale from 0 to 10, I would put it on a 7. But this can help you. This can help you make up your mind actually and say, okay, this is the extent where I would put it. But again, don't say I would put it on a 7 out of 10 or something like that. It's a bit odd, but it helps you to actually find the extent and illustrate it for yourself. Regardless of the task verb, your overall goal remains the same. It's develop a clear judgment and justify it convincingly. Again, some structural advice. First thing you do is refer back to the material. Your evaluation should begin with the author's position that is summed up, or the central claim from the text, or the specific statement that is given in the task. You've got to see what's actually asked of you, and here you can use phrasings like author argues that, or the author claims that, central claim of the text is that, and so on and so forth. If there's additional material, for example a cartoon or statistic, you have to briefly explain its main message before using it in your argumentation. And you've got to say, okay, this is what the cartoon claims, and then you can either integrate it in your argumentation, or you can immediately refer to it by saying, okay, this is something I disagree with, or it's something I agree with for this and that reason, and then you go beyond that. There are several ways. Point is that you first have to explain what it is actually about. And then you present your arguments. Task verb becomes important again. For comments, I said that already. Concentrate on arguments that support your own position. You can include counter-arguments, but only if you immediately respond to them or refute them. Yeah, this is sort of a communicative strategy itself. Yeah, saying, okay, some might argue that, but in my opinion, something else is much more important. Yeah, so it's actually a technique that you can use there. Comment on is much more personal and much more individual. Personal values play a role. Personal outlook on life here, our personal outlook on life in general is important here. For discussion, present both advantages and disadvantages, or two sides to a claim before reaching your conclusion. And assessment, like I said, you've got to evaluate the statement according to suitable criteria. For example, ask yourself to what extent it is convincing, realistic, fair, effective, whatever. And especially here again, look at what the task asks of you. And finally, you've got to reach a judgment, and do not simply stop after listing the arguments. You've got to weigh the evidence, explain why certain arguments are stronger than others, and make your reasoning transparent. That's important. You have to say why you believe that something is the way it is, in your opinion. And it's, again, not about your opinion itself, but it is about how you communicate it and why you believe standpoint, your standpoint is the way it is. So whenever possible, explain why a particular value or criterion matters to you. And that is what turns a simple opinion into a convincing judgment. Yeah, the crucial point here is that it is convincing. And when you've finished task 3, your presentation is almost complete. You now need to bring it to a professional conclusion. You should avoid something like, okay, that's all, or yeah, I'm finished. Instead, you should clearly signal that you are drawing your presentation to a close. And here again, some useful phrases are to conclude, overall, or taking all aspects into consideration. These expressions prepare your audience for your final judgment, and this conclusion should not introduce completely new ideas. You know that from the written exam, it's the same here. Briefly summarize your position, reinforce the most important point you want the audience to remember, and yeah, overall, a good conclusion leaves the audience with a clear final impression and gives your presentation a satisfying ending, and is rounded off well.
So before we finish the theoretical part, let's summarize the most important advice for your preparation. First, make sure you fully understand the task verbs. The difference between outline, analyze, comment on, discuss, and assess determines what is expected from you. And next, plan the overall structure of your presentation before writing detailed notes. Prepare this at home already, that you have a clear structure in mind, picture it, and use it when you can start working on the actual exam. Prepare transitions between the different tasks. They make your presentation sound much more coherent. You can practice some or you can learn some meaningful transitions beforehand as well, and use them as a framework for your presentation. Then always select good evidence from the text. Choose quotations, references that actually support the points you want to make, instead of trying to use as many examples as possible. Quality beats quantity. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you're good with one example. That's not the truth, but find meaningful support. Yeah, take 2 or 3 examples per point and execute them in sufficient detail. And finally, already think about possible arguments for task 3 while you're preparing tasks 1 and 2. Good preparation means thinking ahead rather than treating each task separately. And first and foremost, take notes only. Do not write full sentences. The worst thing you can do is read out in the exam. That's poor presentation quality. Those are poor presentation skills. What you have to do is to speak as freely as possible with notes to which you can refer, obviously. Yeah, you take these notes, you take a look at them, but try to keep eye contact with the examiner. Try to speak as freely as possible, even though it's a situation of pressure. But the teachers around you know that. They know that it's an exam situation, that you feel stressed, that you are nervous, that it matters to you. Yeah, there's something at stake for you. We know that. Yeah. So don't think that reading out fully phrased sentences will bring you any benefit. It doesn't. It won't. Because we know the circumstances, but what you have to show is that you can speak freely in a situation like that you can present freely, and not that you can read out. That's the biggest mistake that you can make presentation-wise. As I was already moving on, during the presentation itself, keep these further aspects in mind. Speak clearly and at a steady pace. You will tend to speak much faster than appropriate because of pressure, because it is an exam situation. Practice this in advance as well. Speaking clearly, slowly, not too slow, but at a pace where you feel that this is an appropriate pace. Record it in advance with the model exam, and see, am I speaking too fast, or am I speaking too slow? Am I speaking clearly enough? These are things that you can practice in advance and that you can prepare for. Then, another important point that I made throughout the whole presentation here: guide your audience through the presentation by using signposting and smooth transitions. Always stay focused on the actual task. If you notice that you're drifting into analysis during task 1 or evaluation during task 2, return to what the task asks you to do. Say something like, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself, I want to go back to task 2. If you see that, don't just go on because you realize, okay, I've made a mistake. Say, okay, I've made a mistake here, I got to go back, yeah? And I'll come back to that later. Much better than just pulling through. Because this actually shows awareness of your presentation skills, yeah? That you are able to correct yourself. It's much bigger quality, a much stronger skill than just pulling through. And then finally, conclude your presentation in a meaningful way and with a proper conclusion. And there's this formula that I wrote down on this slide: structure plus evidence plus a clear judgment equals success. This is the cornerstone of those are the cornerstones of your presentation. And if it's well structured, if it's well prepared, and supported by evidence from the material, plus a convincing judgment at the end, you'll already fulfill many of the criteria for a strong oral examination. And how something like that can look like in the end, I'll show you in the next part of the video, where I'm going to apply this to two examples, one non-fictional text and one fictional text.